I used to stop dirty money for a living. Then a courier handed me a $9.6 million auction invoice in my name, and my billionaire fiancé smiled behind me like it was a gift. I'm a compliance attorney. I know what paper does to a clean life. The letterhead says Marrow and Wexley Fine Art. The total line says $9,600,000. Payment due within 24 hours, by tomorrow evening. The buyer line says Cressida Lockhart, like I asked for any of this. He puts a hand at my lower back, tender enough to fool a room. My phone pings, his chief of staff confirming the courier like this is scheduled. The wire screen is already open. If I touch that wire, I become the buyer on record. This isn't a gift. This is a transaction using my identity. Because someone needs to stay silent before his big morning. This is the story of how a $9.6 million invoice turned my engagement into a crime scene. And maybe you know this fear. When the man you love can make the world agree he's right. Earlier that evening, the penthouse is dressed for calm, the kind money buys on purpose. Calicotta marble wiped clean, walnut walls warm as a promise, museum track lights turning the room into a gallery where nothing is allowed to look messy. Even the unopened bottle of Krug on the bar cart sits perfectly centered, like celebration is something you schedule in advance. Thayer stands at the window in a charcoal cashmere crewneck, tall and still, the city reflected over his shoulder like an extra board of directors. Eyes heavy-lidded, not quite tired, just controlled. His watch catches the light when he checks it. Once, then again, like time is a tool he's used to owning. He comes up behind me and places his hand at my lower back. Warm, precise. I'm in a cream matte silk blouse and tailored charcoal trousers, hair pulled into a sleek low bun. The kind of neat that tells strangers I'm competent before I've said a word. His fingers press gently, guiding me a half step closer to the glass. His voice is soft, private. He says, "After this week, it's ours. No more noise." I want to believe him. That's the oldest temptation in a room like this, thinking wealth is the same thing as safety. My engagement ring glints when my thumb brushes it, a tiny reflex I've never managed to outgrow. A phone vibrates on the marble. Not mine, his. Thayer doesn't flinch, but his hand stays on my back while he reads. The screen glow paints his jaw for half a second, and I catch the name at the top before it disappears. Juno Merrick, his chief of staff. He doesn't say what the message is. He doesn't have to. The way his shoulders settle tells me it's not a personal reminder, it's a procedural one. I take a slow breath and keep my face calm. Old habits. In my world, composure isn't confidence, it's evidence control. A second vibration. This time his eyes flick toward the entry corridor, toward the private elevator, toward the invisible machinery that keeps this place running. The penthouse is so quiet, you can hear hierarchy. Then the intercom chimes, soft, polite, expensive. Thayer's hand slides from my lower back to my waist, a fraction tighter. Not a hug, a placement. And the first thought that lands isn't romantic at all. It's procedural. Whatever is coming through that door tonight, he already knows its timing. Thayer doesn't go to the door himself. He never has to. In a building like this, the door is a job. One of many jobs that keeps a man like him untouched. The courier is role only. Polite, brief, eyes flicking past me as if the person who matters must be somewhere behind my shoulder. He holds out a cream envelope with the kind of neutrality people practice when they handle expensive things for other people. It lands on the Calicut marble island with a soft tap that feels louder than it should. Thayer's hand returns to my lower back, just as gentle, just as positioned. "Open it," he says, like it's already decided. I do. Because I'm not 17, and I'm not afraid of paper. That's what I tell myself as my fingers slide under the flap. The letterhead appears first. Marrow and Wexley Fine Art. Clean typography. Discreet. Then the number hits like an unwanted weight. $9,600,000. And under it, the line that turns my mouth dry. Payment due within 24 hours, by tomorrow evening. My gaze drops again, as if rereading could change the ink. Then I see it. Buyer, Cressida Lockhart. Not Thayer Blackwell. Not an LLC or a trust. Me. My name sitting there like a handle someone intends to grab. Thayer leans closer, his voice lowering into something intimate, almost kind. His words, sandaled. "It's protective. You don't need to worry." Protective. That word always sounds warm until you look at who gets hurt if it fails. My thumb finds my engagement ring again. A small, involuntary circle. The kind of motion you do when you're trying to keep your hands from shaking in front of someone who thinks shaking is weakness. I don't look at him right away. I look at the invoice, at the buyer line, at the due line. Why is it in my name? He exhales once, controlled. Not angry, more like impatient with a question he thinks shouldn't exist. "Because you're clean," he says, and smiles as if he's complimenting me. Billionaires love calling a person clean. It lets them pretend they're talking about character, not utility. I lift my eyes. I let him see I'm not confused. I'm calculating. My hand slides the packet slightly, exposing the stapled pages beneath. Not just an invoice, attachments, a system, a story already written. And for the first time tonight, I don't feel like his fiancé. I feel like an instrument someone is trying to pick up. The phone lights again, this time on the marble, in my line of sight. Thayer doesn't try to hide it. Hiding would imply guilt. He prefers inevitability. The banner reads, Juno Merrick, Chief of Staff. Courier confirmed. Deadline unchanged. Juno's name on the screen does something subtle to the air. It turns the penthouse from a home back into an operation. Thayer's face doesn't change much, eyes steady, mouth calm, but the warmth drains from the space between his words. He sets his phone down and pivots the conversation the way he pivots everything, toward the outcome. He slides my phone across the marble, already awake, wire screen open, authorize waiting like a polite trap. His hand returns to my lower back, then drifts down, guiding my wrist the way you guide someone through a doorway you've already chosen. In another life, another mood, this could have been intimacy. The soft voice, the close distance, the sense of we. Tonight, it's a system using touch as a lever. No. The word lands small. The room doesn't argue with it. Thayer does. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't threaten. He just speaks like a man used to being agreed with. Cressida, it's one transfer. Then it's done. He says my name like it's a key he expects to work. I don't move my thumb toward the button. I let the silence stretch until it becomes visible. Then I do something I know I'll never be able to undo. Not legally, but emotionally. I pick up the invoice packet and take my phone in my other hand. I angle the camera over the paper and start documenting. The letterhead, the $9,600,000, the 24-hour due line. My name as buyer. One photo, then another, catching the stapled attachments beneath. Thayer watches my hands. His jaw flexed, then went still. His eyes stayed on my thumb like it was a signature.
Line. Patient, certain, entitled. He still didn't know when to stop. I set the packet back down exactly where it was, like I never touched it. I lock my phone. I slide it into my pocket. And only then do I look up at him. Eyes steady, face composed, skin warm under cold light. If you want it in my name, you can explain it in my presence, not with my fingerprints on your wire. For the first time, his hand leaves my body entirely. Not in anger, in recalculation. His phone starts vibrating again. Another schedule, another reminder, another person who believes deadlines are stronger than consent. Thayer turns away and answers, already smoothing his tone back into public calm. I stay at the Marble Island with the invoice in front of me, the champagne still sealed behind me, and the quiet certainty settling in. This wasn't delivered to me. It was aimed at me. And I'm not wiring a single dollar until I understand the whole file. After midnight, the penthouse looked the same. Pristine, expensive, unbothered. Luxury doesn't react. It just keeps shining while you bleed quietly. Thayer had taken his calls in the other room, voice low, controlled. Public calm over private pressure. When the door shut, the quiet felt engineered. Sound-dampening carpet, soft close cabinetry, a home built to swallow panic whole. I stayed at the Marble Island in my cream silk blouse and charcoal trousers. Sleeves rolled once now, hair still in that sleek, low bun because I hadn't earned the right to fall apart. The invoice packet sat open under the track lights. My phone, my counterproof, rested face down beside it, photos already saved. The Krug on the bar cart remained unopened, like celebration was a rumor someone started about us. I spread the pages out in a clean fan. Letterhead, total line, due line, buyer line. Then attachments, forms that read like they'd been assembled by someone who knew exactly what an auction house wanted to see. The first thing I looked for wasn't a number, it was a trail. Where is the moment I became the buyer on purpose? A signature, a verified authorization, anything that said consent. Instead, I found structure. Contact fields filled in with my information, too neat, too complete. A bidder number assigned. A space where an authorized representative should have been named, left vague in a way that felt intentional. Rich people don't leave blanks by accident. They leave blanks for later. I picked up the staple corner and tilted the packet toward the light. My engagement ring kissed the paper as I steadied it, metal tapping once, twice, as if my hand wanted to turn anxiety into rhythm. And then, there it was. Not loud or dramatic, just a line that made me go very still. A short description of the buyer profile. Clean, low risk, presentable. Not because I'd earned it, because my history could be used. A former private bank compliance officer. No scandals, no headlines. A name that looked good on record. The file didn't just identify me, it sold me. A memory rose on the smallest trigger earlier in my life at our kitchen table, my father's pen hovering over a document he didn't fully understand. 12 years ago, he'd signed because someone in a suit told him it was standard. His dignity had been used as packaging. Back in Thayer's penthouse, my hands were flat on the marble, pressing the paper down as if pressure could keep it from becoming real. I took a slow breath and started marking attachment points in my head. Every place where this file could turn toxic with one wrong move. The buyer line, the bidder number, the wire authorization screen waiting on my phone, the absence of any clear consent trail that would protect me. If Thayer wired the money from his accounts, he'd have fingerprints. If I wired it from mine, I'd have a confession, and that was the point. I lifted my phone and took one more photo, close enough to capture the buyer profile language and the bidder number in the same frame. Then I slid the packet back into a tidy stack and squared the edges, restoring the illusion of calm. It was the only mercy I could offer myself. A clean surface, while my mind ran ugly math. A little before 2, I stopped looking at the invoice total and started looking at the destination. The wire instruction page was tucked beneath the invoice, clean, clinical, the kind of sheet that makes 8 figures look routine. I pulled it free and laid it flat on the marble. The recipient wasn't there. It wasn't a trust or a foundation. Not anything that sounded like an auction house escrow. It was an entity name that felt human, purpose-built. Like someone had taken a person and shaved them into an abbreviation that could pass in a bank field without raising a flag. My fingers traced the printed lines without touching them too long. Habit. In compliance, you learn how quickly "I only looked" turns into "I was involved." I opened the transfer screen on my phone again. Generic interface, sterile button. Authorize waiting at the bottom like a dare. The marble reflected the light back into my face, turning my own features into a faint double. A woman seeing herself split into 2 roles, fiancé and buyer. I took a single screenshot, not because it was new information, but because it made the mechanism visible. Invoice on paper, wire on screen, my name bridging them. Then I noticed something small in the wire sheet language. Nothing dramatic, just tone. It didn't talk about art, provenance, insurance, storage. It talked about speed, clarity, finality. The kind of language you use when what matters isn't what you're buying, only that it arrives clean. I sat back on the bar stool and let my ringed hand rest on the cool marble. The engagement ring felt heavier than it had earlier, like metal could absorb context. A thought came sharp and simple, the kind that doesn't need poetry. This money isn't meant to buy a painting. It's meant to buy an outcome. I stared at the recipient name again, trying to imagine a face without giving it one. Whoever they were, their identity didn't matter yet. What mattered was that someone's silence had a price. And Thayer had chosen my name as the wrapper. In my old job, this would have been a memo. In this kitchen, it was my name. In the other room, I heard Thayer's voice drop into a softer register, comforting someone, negotiating, promising. Then it rose again, clipped, efficient. He could be tender and operational in the same breath. That was the part I hadn't prepared for. I slid the wire sheet back under the invoice, squared the edges again, and left it right where it wanted to be, centered on the marble, under the light, like an altar to procedure. I didn't wire anything, but I stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. Morning didn't arrive gently. It arrived white and bright through the glass, washing the penthouse clean the way money always tries to. Like daylight could erase what happened at night. I was still in the same clothes, blouse creased now at the elbows, bun a little less perfect. My eyes felt tight,
but I'd done worse nights for less money. Thayer somehow looked rested. Not relaxed. Rested. The difference matters. He came in wearing a crisp white shirt this time, sleeves rolled with intention, dark trousers sitting perfectly on his hips like tailoring was a form of discipline. His eyes landed on me and softened, just enough. In his hands, a mug of coffee, placed in front of me like an offering. "Cress," he said quietly, shortening my name the way you do when you want closeness. "We don't have time for a principal fight." The tenderness in his voice was real. That's what makes it dangerous. He wasn't acting like a monster. He was acting like a man who believed the world only punished mistakes, not motives. He slid my phone across the marble. The transfer screen was already open again. Authorize waiting. He didn't ask if it was. He didn't need to. Juno's world ran on prepared surfaces. His hand found my wrist. Not tight, not forceful. Guiding. The same lower back touch, relocated. A soft correction. Just do it, and it's done. Then we can breathe. I lifted my eyes to his. And for a second, I saw something beneath the control. Fear. Not of me, of exposure. Of a public mourning that could turn a small fracture into a headline. His thumb brushed the side of my hand, almost apologetic. And for a second, my body leaned toward forgiveness, before my mind caught up. Why can't it be in your name? Thayer's jaw worked once. He looked past me at the window, not at the city, at the idea of an audience. Because tomorrow, he said, and stopped. Like saying the rest out loud would make it true in a way even he couldn't manage. Then he came back to me. Because your name survives things, mine can't. There it was, a confession dressed as flattery. He didn't say clean face. He didn't have to. I'd read it on the paper. Now I heard it in his mouth. My stomach tightened, not with shock anymore, with clarity. A question rose inside me, sharp enough to hurt. If a man loves you and uses you at the same time, which part do you honor? I looked down at my hand on the marble. The engagement ring caught the morning light, bright, innocent. I turned it once, slowly, until the stone faced inward against my finger. A private gesture, not a breakup, a boundary. Thayer, you're asking me to become the buyer. He didn't deny it. He leaned closer and tried to make the word buyer sound like partner. I'm asking you to help us. He said us, and my name stayed the only one on the invoice. I pulled my wrist back, not dramatically, just enough to break the guidance. The space between his fingers and my skin felt colder than it should. And the truth landed with a calm that scared me more than anger. He hadn't chosen me because I was pliable. He'd chosen me because I was clean. I found the side letter because I stopped trusting the stack. Not the top pages, the ones meant to be seen. The ones beneath. The ones folded too neatly, tucked like secrets you can file. I slid the packet apart again and lifted a thinner sheet. Different tone, different purpose. No mention of brushstrokes or storage, just clean paragraphs and careful verbs. Consulting. Mutual non-disparagement. Acknowledgement. The kind of language that pretends it's neutral while it decides what a person is allowed to say. I read one clause twice, my eyes moving slower than my mind. The room stayed bright,
The marble stayed perfect, and my stomach did something quiet and ugly. This wasn't about art at all. This was about silence, dressed up as terms. I didn't say the obvious phrase out loud. I didn't need to. The document said it for me, in the way it fenced in speech and called it agreement. My ring hand tightened on the paper. When I released it, page held a faint curve, as if it remembered being gripped. Thayer watched me read. His face stayed composed, but his gaze sharpened, tracking what line I was on, how close I was to naming what he didn't want named. "You're making it bigger than it is," he said. "It's standard protection." Standard. Another word that tries to make harm feel ordinary. Before I could answer, my phone lit again. Juno Merrick, Chief of Staff, calling this time, not texting. Thayer glanced at the screen and, after a beat, hit speaker. Juno's voice filled the kitchen like chilled water. Clear, polite, unstoppable. "Good morning. Just a reminder, the payment window closes tomorrow evening. We don't want your name associated with a default." My eyes went to the invoice total, $9,600,000. Then to the buyer line. "My name." Juno continued, as if she were discussing catering. "If funds aren't received, the auction house proceeds with the buyer of record. That creates questions. We're trying to spare you those." Spare you. As if the danger wasn't the plan, only the consequence. Thayer didn't look at me. He looked at the window again, at that invisible audience waiting for him to be spotless. Men like Thayer don't panic. They delegate panic. I held the side letter up slightly, letting Thayer see I had it fully now, not just a glance. The paper trembled once at the edge, small, betraying, human. And I realized the entanglement in its simplest form. If I refused, they could still let my name take the bruise. If I complied, my name would take the stain. There wasn't a clean door out of a room designed like this. I asked myself a question I didn't want to answer. If the only way to stay safe is to help a powerful man stay clean, is that safety or surrender? I lowered the side letter to the marble, placed it beside the invoice like a matching set, and said the only true thing left to say. "I'm not wiring anything." On the speaker, Juno paused, barely a pause, just long enough to register that I'd become inconvenient. "Understood. Then we'll proceed with the contingency." Contingency. A word that turns a woman into a file. Thayer's gaze finally met mine. Gray-blue steady. Love somewhere in there and control wrapped around it. And I knew what the next hours would feel like. Not like a scream. Like paperwork closing. I didn't wait for Thayer to finish another call. Waiting was how people like him won. They turned your hesitation into their schedule. I stood at the Calicut Marble Island with the invoice, the wire sheet, and the side letter laid out in a straight line, paper arranged like a clean argument. My cream-soaked blouse was wrinkled at the elbows now, charcoal trousers still crisp, hair still pulled into a sleek, low bun that had started to loosen at the nape. The ring on my finger caught the track light and looked optimistic. It bothered me how pretty it still was. Thayer came in with his phone in hand, crisp white shirt sleeves rolled, expression already set to reasonable. He looked at the documents the way some men look at weather, annoyed but confident it would pass. I tapped one finger on the buyer line. Not hard, just enough to make the paper answer. "You filed this in my name." He didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend to be surprised I'd figured it out. "I arranged it, yes." I slid the side letter forward. The words non-disparagement sat there like a stain that wouldn't wash out. This isn't art. It's silence. Thayer's jaw flexed, then went still. A micro-movement, then the mask returned. It's risk. It's containment. It's keeping our lives intact. Our. The pronoun landed wrong. The risk wasn't shared. The risk had my name printed on it. I picked up my phone and turned it so he could see the screenshot I'd taken. The generic transfer screen, authorize, waiting, my reflection faint in the glass. You keep saying protective, like protection doesn't have a cost. Thayer stepped closer. His hand reached for my wrist, then stopped, hovering, as if he'd realized touch wasn't working the way it had yesterday. He looked at my face, really looked this time. And there was a flicker of something underneath the control. A man who'd built his life on not losing. Cressida, tomorrow can't have this attached to me. There it was. Not a confession of guilt. A confession of priority. I felt my throat tighten, not with panic, with recognition. The same recognition I'd seen on my father's face years ago when he realized he'd been chosen not for what he could do, but for what his name could absorb. My voice stayed even. It had to. So you picked mine. Thayer didn't flinch. I picked the name that survives. For a second, the room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator's soft hum, the building's deep mechanical breath. The penthouse kept being luxurious while something in me stopped believing in it. A crystal water glass sat near the sink, untouched, perfect. My hand brushed it as I moved the papers, and it tipped. It didn't shatter dramatically. It hit the marble and cracked with a thin, brittle sound. We both looked down. The fracture webbed across the base, clean and irreversible. Even the glass understood consequences better than he did. I looked back up at him and asked the only question that mattered now. If a man can love you and still use you, what are you supposed to save? His heart or your name? Thayer opened his mouth, then closed it. Not because he had nothing to say, because saying it wouldn't change what he'd already built. And that was the heartbreak. There was no argument to win, only a structure to escape. Juno arrived the way bad news arrives when it's well-funded, quietly, with access. I heard the private elevator before I saw her. A soft chime, a door that didn't squeak, security that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. When she stepped into the kitchen, she looked like she belonged to the building more than I did. Juno Merrick, chief of staff, was 44 and immaculate. Slim build, narrow oval face, steel gray-green eyes that didn't waste motion, dark blonde hair twisted into a tight French roll with not a single loose strand. A deep navy tailored suit, ivory soak shell, thin gold watch. Polished enough to be trusted, cold enough to be feared. She didn't glance at the cracked crystal on the marble. She didn't glance at my face. She looked at the documents like they were calendar entries. Good, you've kept the packet together. Thayer stood near the window in his white shirt like he was supervising his own weather. I stayed at the island. Cream blouse, wrinkled elbows, ring turned inward on my finger, phone in my hand, evidence in my pocket. My heart, somewhere behind my ribs, quieter than it should have been. What happens if I don't pay? Juno didn't blink. She didn't frown. She didn't perform sympathy. The auction house proceeds with the buyer of record. That's you. I forced the next question through without softening it. And the wire recipient? Juno's mouth curved into something that could have been a smile if it contained warmth. The recipient is properly documented. The transfer is clean if executed as instructed. Clean. That word again. Always served to the same people. I looked at Thayer. He didn't interrupt, which told me Juno was speaking for him, not around him. Juno continued, as if explaining a seating chart. There will be verification steps, calls, confirmations. Your bank may ask questions. If you hesitate under verification, that creates uncertainty. We're trying to spare you uncertainty. Spare you uncertainty. The threat wrapped in concern. When powerful people say they're sparing you, check where they've placed the knife. My stomach tightened, not with fear now, but with the kind of anger that stays quiet because it's saving oxygen. I opened my phone and brought up the photos again, the screenshot of Authorize, the buyer line with my name. Not to show them, to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Then I asked the one question I'd been avoiding, because it made the room feel smaller. If this goes wrong, whose story does the world believe? Thayer answered before Juno could. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mine. The word landed with no apology attached. He took one step closer, the marble between us reflecting his shirt like a bright flag. If you fight this loudly, you lose. If you fight it correctly, you might survive. He finally said it plainly. Not, I'm protecting us. Not, I love you. Just the rules of the room. I thought of my father again. How the system had treated his name as a convenient landing pad for consequences that needed a place to fall. And I understood something new. Something colder. Juno wasn't the villain. She was the mechanism. Thayer wasn't the monster. He was the architect who thought love included scaffolding. Which meant my only option wasn't to plead, it was to out-procedure them. I lowered my phone, met Juno's unblinking eyes, and said it with the calm I used to reserve for closing meetings. Then I'll be speaking to the auction house directly. Juno's head tilted a millimeter. Not surprise. Calculation. As you wish. Just remember, time doesn't pause for principles. And the cracked crystal on the marble sat between us, catching the light in its fracture lines, as if even objects had started recording what happened here. Once you see the structure, you stop negotiating with it. I moved with the quiet speed of someone who used to build reports that decided whether people kept their money or lost it. I pulled my phone up and used the scanner function to capture clean, straight images. Invoice, due line, buyer line, wire sheet, the side letter headings. Not a flurry. A set. Then I opened Thayer's sleek printer drawer, white paper stacked like it had never been touched by human hands, and printed only what I needed. A few pages. The most damning parts, in the simplest order. Proof that didn't rely on my emotions to be convincing. I slid the pages into a thin folder from a drawer, nothing branded, just clean cardstock. I added one handwritten note at the top in my own neat script. Unauthorized use of identity, buyer of record. I didn't sign it. Not yet. I wasn't giving them my signature for free. My engagement ring pressed into my finger as I worked, a physical reminder of how long I'd worn trust without checking its seams. I turned the ring again, stone still facing inward. Thayer watched from the far side of the island. His calm had shifted into something flatter. Less tenderness, more containment. Going to them makes this public. I didn't look up right away. I clipped the folder shut. Going to them makes it documented. He stepped into my path as I moved toward the foyer. No grabbing, no yelling. Just a tall man in a crisp white shirt, placing himself where I needed to pass, as if his body could be a polite wall. The penthouse corridor behind him was all walnut and soft light. Art hung at perfect height, the private elevator door flush and silent. An empire's hallway. His eyes held mine. You don't understand what you're disrupting. I stopped close enough to catch his cologne, clean, dry, and carefully measured, and realized he was right in only one way. I did understand. I understood that his life could absorb disruption and still stand. Mine couldn't. I understand exactly what I'm disrupting. That's why I'm leaving. For a moment, I saw the man I'd loved, fear flickering again, not for me, for the public mourning. Then it hardened into calculation. He stepped aside. Not generosity, strategy. As if letting me go would make me responsible for what happened next. I walked into the private elevator with my folder held to my chest like it was fragile, and felt the first truly cold thing of the day. Relief. In the mirrored metal, my face looked older than last night. Still the same features, but rearranged by knowledge. When the elevator descended, I stared at my reflection and made myself a promise my father hadn't known he was allowed to make. I will not be the clean face for someone else's mess. And whatever this costs me in love, I will pay it with honesty before I pay anything with my name. Marrow and Wexley Fine Art didn't look like a place where lives got ruined. It looked like a place where reputations got polished. The private viewing salon was hushed, carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps, walls dressed in soft gray fabric, brass lamp pools falling onto provenance folders like warm secrets. A keypad-controlled door sat at the back, unmarked except for a small plaque that said "Compliance" in lettering so discreet it felt like a warning. I walked in wearing the same cream matte silk blouse and charcoal trousers, now creased from hours of refusing sleep. My hair, natural black 4C pulled into a sleek low bun, had loosened at the nape. My face felt rearranged by the day. The folder was held tight against my ribs like it had a pulse. At the reception desk, a roll-only assistant looked past me once, toward the corridor, toward the kind of person they expected to arrive with a name like mine printed on an invoice. I'm the buyer of record, I said, and watched their eyes correct themselves. They made a call. A roll-only compliance officer appeared. Neutral suit, neutral expression, neutral voice, carrying a thin stack of forms as if neutrality could scrub what money was trying to do. The compliance room was smaller than the salon, and colder on purpose. Walnut table, frosted glass wall, a single brass desk lamp, a pitcher of water untouched. The kind of room built to make truth sound like administration. I laid my packet down and opened it in the clean order I'd prepared. Invoice, wire instructions, side letter headings, then my phone screenshots printed out. No theatrics, no pleading, just a record. The compliance officer skimmed, eyes pausing where mine had paused. Buyer, Cressida Lockhart. Payment due within 24 hours, by tomorrow evening. And the language about speech that had nothing to do with art. They call it discretion. It's just damage with better carpeting. I need to file an unauthorized bid affidavit, I said, keeping my voice even. My identity was used to register and invoice a purchase I did not authorize.
The compliance officer didn't react emotionally. That was the point of the room. But I saw the shift in their posture, the smallest tightening at the shoulders. Procedure had just become obligation. A form slid across the walnut. Dense paragraphs, signature line waiting like a trap door. I picked up the pen. The nib hovered. My engagement ring pressed into my finger. Stone turned inward from this morning, a boundary I'd set without making a speech. I took the ring off. No drama, just the motion of choosing what counts as evidence. I placed it on the invoice's $9,600,000 total line, dead center, pinning the number to the paper like it might try to run. The metal made a soft sound when it touched the page. The end-hemmed
Note, low register, held 5 seconds, then I signed. The pen scratched the affidavit with a plain, ugly honesty. Ink sinking into fibers, no romance left to hide behind. When I pushed the signed page back, the compliance officer nodded once and stood, carrying the affidavit toward a cabinet as if it were just another file. But the way the room held its breath told the truth. The sale was no longer simple. "This triggers a compliance hold pending review," the officer said, careful and formal. "No funds will be accepted until it's resolved." I didn't exhale in relief. Relief would have been warm. This wasn't warm. This was survival. I picked up my ring and slid it into my coat pocket, no longer something I wore outward like a promise. The invoice stayed on the table beneath the lamp. Still perfect paper, now permanently changed. And in that fluorescent calm, I understood the cost with a clarity that felt almost merciless. I'd saved my name. I hadn't saved my life with him. The compliance officer had barely finished their sentence when the door opened again. The door opened without ceremony, like his presence had already been cleared. Thayer Blackwell stepped into the frosted glass room, like the room had been expecting him. White shirt with sleeves rolled, dark trousers, minimalist watch catching the brass lamplight. Eyes moved from the affidavit to the invoice to my face in a clean sequence, like he was reading a report. Juno Merrick, chief of staff, was a few steps behind him. 44, immaculate in her deep navy suit, hair twisted tight. Her calm looked the same in a penthouse and in a compliance room, which told me it wasn't calm, it was design. Thayer stopped at the edge of the walnut table. He didn't touch anything. He didn't need to. The room had already shifted around him. He looked at my left hand first. Bare. Not because I'd thrown the ring, because I'd pocketed it, like a fact I wasn't ready to display. His mouth tightened, one controlled movement. He kept his voice low. "You didn't have to do it like this." I didn't answer with a speech. I picked up my folder, squared the edges with my thumb, and met his gaze. My eyes to his. Two kinds of certainty. I did. That was all. Not vengeance or cruelty. Just truth. Juno shifted her weight slightly, as if preparing to offer an alternative timeline, one where this could still be smoothed over if I'd just cooperate. But the compliance officer spoke first, polite and immovable. "The transaction is on hold pending review. No funds will be accepted." Thayer's eyes flicked once, toward Juno, toward the ceiling, toward whatever public mourning waited for him outside this room. The fear I'd seen earlier didn't return as panic. It returned as calculation. And that was the last lesson he gave me without meaning to. He would survive this because he was built to survive consequences. I would survive this only if I refused to carry them for him. I walked to the door. My shoes made almost no sound on the carpet. The auction house had spent a fortune to keep everything quiet. At the threshold, I paused, not to beg, not to bargain, just to look at him one final time, long enough to let the moment record itself. He looked back. No apology, no rage, only the kind of stare that says, I would do it again, because it worked until you stopped it. I left anyway. Out in the salon, the brass lamps still glowed warmly over paintings meant to outlive everyone in the building. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and felt the ring there, cold metal against my palm. And the strangest part was this. It wasn't heartbreak that made me shake. It was relief, without warmth. I keep thinking about the first moment, the marble, the envelope, the way his smile lived in the glass behind me. Back then, it almost worked. The room was beautiful enough to make danger feel hypothetical. Now I know better. A clean name is not a compliment in the rooms where power lives. It's a resource. Something that can be spent without asking you, because the system prefers a respectable signature to a messy truth. I kept my name. I lost the life it was meant to buy. I did something smaller and harder. I made the paper tell the right story before his people could. And yes, there was a moment at that walnut table when I placed my ring on the $9,600,000 line. Not to punish him. To remind myself that love doesn't get to outrank consent. The strange part is how quiet it all was. No shouting, no sirens, just brass lamp light and a pen scratching across a page. Procedure doing what threats don't. Sticking. Thayer will walk into the morning intact because consequences rarely keep his address. He'll walk into his public morning looking untouched because he's built a life where consequences are outsourced. But I will survive too, only in a different currency. Not comfort, not belonging, just the relief of knowing my name is still mine. So here's what I can't stop asking. If the only way to live through power is to speak its language, do you stay clean? Or do you just learn how to look clean? This is American Billionaire Tales, where fortune meets fate, where love becomes paperwork and paperwork becomes proof. Tell me in the comments if you'd have kept it quiet or made it public. And if this felt familiar, send it to the person who'll hear it. And if you want the next episode the moment it drops, subscribe.